Thanks for joining us as author Dwayne Anderson presents the diagram Biblical Church Development. The link for the diagram can be found in the description box below. Join us now as Dwayne teaches through this material.
In the book of Acts, we see the development of the early church, and we can look at the church of Jerusalem or Antioch or the churches in Galatia or Corinth or Ephesus, and we can see a biblical pattern of church development. If that pattern is followed, we see that churches grow strong. If that pattern is skip steps, then we have problems because there's part of the foundation missing. We're going to take the churches in Galatia. It tells us in Acts chapter 14 that Paul and Barnabas came to the area of Lystra and Derbe, and it says in Acts 14 they were preaching the gospel there. We see it goes on in verse 21, and when they had preached the gospel to that city and made many disciples. Notice that the first stage was the initial contacts where evangelism happened. Now, as evangelism happened, people believed. They were becoming followers of Christ. Then they gathered those who had believed, and we see this in each of the churches, and they were teaching them and instructing them in what Christ had done and how Christ had worked. And so we see that the stage 2 is the development of stable Christians. Notice what it says in the second part of the verse, when they had preached the gospel of the city and made many disciples. And so as Paul and Barnabas instructed them, these people became stable Christians. In verse 22 it says they were strengthening the souls of the disciples, exhorting them to continue in the faith, and saying, we must through many tribulations enter the kingdom of God. Now here we see the goal, one of the goals that the apostles had was to strengthen and develop godly trained leadership. And as they developed godly trained leadership to lead the Christians in the various areas, they realized that they needed men who were qualified. And so they developed men who were qualified to lead the church by strengthening the souls of the disciples. Stage 3 is, the goal is spiritual trained leadership. Then it says, so when they had appointed elders in every church and prayed with fasting, they commended them to the Lord in whom they had believed. Now we come to stage 4, or what we might call the situation of church organization. They realized that these new Christians, because they had been taught and trained, they were able to carry on and they were able to become healthy churches. But now we're moving on to stage 5, where they also became sending churches to send out people from their own congregations to help plant churches in other areas. In chapter 16, they come back to Derbe and Lystra, and it says in verses 1 through 5, then he came to Derbe and Lystra, and behold, a certain disciple was there named Timothy, the son of a certain Jewish woman who believed, but his father was Greek. He was well reported of by the brethren who were at Lystra and Iconium. Paul wanted to have him go on with him. He took him and circumcised him because of the Jews who were in that region, for they all knew that his father was Greek. And as they went through the cities, they delivered to them the decrees to keep, which were determined by the apostles and elders at Jerusalem. So the churches were strengthened in the faith and increased in number daily. Timothy had gained a good report among the disciples in both cities. That meant that he was serving the Lord by going from place to place in the area where he lived, sharing the gospel. And Paul could see that here was a young man who could become very effective in training others also. So we see 5 stages here. Stage 1, those initial contacts. The goal, evangelism. Stage 2, the group meetings. And the goal, stable Christians. As we come to stage 3, we see church beginnings and leadership development. And the goal is spiritual trained leadership or godly trained leadership. Stage 4, church organization. And here we see that the goal was to establish independent churches with their own leadership that could carry on when Paul and Barnabas left the area. And then stage 5, church extension, the goals to become sending churches, then to develop sister churches in the area in between.